These are aspects of temperament. And so temperament is that part that is nature as opposed to nurture. So all these things are aspects of our total personality, plus the fact that we're always free, as we know as Catholics, we're always free to respond to God's grace.
Hello and welcome to the Catholic Homeschool Podcast. I am your host, Paola, and today's guest is Laraine Bennett. And I am so excited for this because, it's something very close to my heart and you'll hear me talk about very often, but it's, do our children and do we come into this world a blank slate just to fill up? Or maybe we have predetermined tendencies or things that God has planted in our hearts to give him the glory. We're going to dive deep into the temperaments that God gave you. Hello, Laraine. How are you? So glad to have you here.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on your podcast, your show. Thank you.
So good to have you here. I was telling, before we went live, we said this is like a meaty subject, because we've done podcasts, Laraine, before on educational philosophies, on learning styles, teaching styles, and now we're going to be talking about temperaments. So I really and I know that you'll be able to unpack for us, those personality things that we keep coming up against and understand, why are my kids behaving that way? Or why is my spouse behaving that way? But before we dive in, let me get, housekeeping here. I'm going to say a bio for those of you who do not know Laraine. Laraine Bennett has a master's degree in philosophy and has co-authored 6 books with her husband, Art. She wrote The Temperament God Gave You, The Temperament God Gave Your Kids, and The Temperament God Gave Your Spouse, amongst others. Also, one solo book, A Year of Grace, 365 Reflections for Caregivers, and a little sneak peek here to a game that we're going to talk about as well. A game, yay! So today, Laraine, let's talk about temperaments. Let's just get right to it. What exactly is a temperament?
Oh, well, that's a great question. A great place to start, too. So the important thing that we like to state at the outset in our books, is that temperament is not the whole of our personality. So we're not trying to put people in boxes, and say, you're stuck with this. This is it for you. Your whole personality boils down to this temperament. No, temperament is actually that part of our personality that we say is God's gift to us, to kind of kickstart our personalities. So every baby has a little budding personality, as anybody who's a mom knows, they're different, Some babies are super chill, very easygoing. Other babies are intense and anxious and they cry, and they get overloaded. Well, all these are aspects of temperament. And so temperament is that part that is nature, that as opposed to nurture. So in our total personality, there's also, so many other factors like, our culture, like our family of origin, where we were educated, how many siblings did we have, all these things, our birth order even. So all these things are aspects of our total personality, plus the fact that we're always free, as we know as Catholics, we're always free to respond to God's grace. So we're not like determined by our temperament or determined by our culture, let's say, or our environment or anything like that. We can always respond in the way that God is calling us to. And we hope, of course, to grow in holiness, But anyway, it's the idea is, though, that if we know what our temperament is, we actually have kind of a clue as to already what our strengths and weaknesses are. So that's why it's so useful to know, and especially for homeschoolers,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love one of those things I always say to our homeschool families here is like, you're not perfect and your children have free will, because we think,
Right.
we can impose a curriculum or a
Oh,
design
yeah.
on them. And meanwhile, you're like, why is it, or even we'll buy something, it works for one child, but it doesn't work for another.
Oh, so true.
Yeah. So how does that well, I know, for example, there are all sorts of personality quizzes out there and this and that. And Laraine, give me a little background. Like, how did you actually come up with, where did it come from? And I know there's 4, if I'm not mistaken, 4 classical temperaments for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great. Well, so good question, because it's interesting. Kind of going back to how we got started in it. We actually read, of course, my husband is a marriage and family therapist, so he kind of knew about personalities and temperaments and things like that. But then we stumbled across this really old and really teeny tiny book written in 1930 by Father Conrad Hawk. And it was on the 4 classic temperaments, going all the way back to the ancient Greeks. That's why we have the strange names. So they're choleric or choleric, some people say, phlegmatic, melancholic, and sanguine. And that's what I think Hippocrates himself maybe named those. He was the one who came up with those names. And we don't, like contemporary psychologists, they're not necessarily going to talk about the temperament in those terms. But we decided, because there was this long history in our Catholic faith, going way back, back to the Middle Ages even, of saints and popes even, and spiritual writers writing about temperament using these 4 classic names. And they even used it originally, like going back to this 1930s book that we stumbled across, they used it in spiritual direction. So maybe in formation of priests originally, or maybe monks, who knows? And so we found this book and we were like, wow, this is brilliant. And there wasn't anything, in like for contemporary parents, up to, for us, to learn about either ourselves or our spouses or our kids. And so that's why we ended up, writing about temperaments, and we did a ton of research and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, so that's how
it came to be. Yeah. So it's ancient wisdom, but I love the fact that you're saying, it's really layering in, I think, the difference here, because again, there's all these different personalities things. It's, where does God play? Where is he playing that role within that temperament? Understanding of it.
Well, and he made each of us different and unique, but he also started us off with what we say is, God's gift to us. And we aren't all the same. And that's the thing that's so interesting. Like when you, I think it's maybe original sin, human nature, that a lot of times we tend to assume that other people should respond the same way we respond. And then when they don't, we judge them harshly.
Right. Well, I know when you gave a talk, one of the things, of course, and parents who are listening to this can relate to how, we relate to our spouse, but also to our children. And just, we're sometimes so flummoxed, like, why are they even behaving that way?
Yeah, exactly.
So let's go through the 4. Give me, I know we'll talk about where people can combine resources and all, but kind of a nutshell of what are the 4
snapshot. Yeah, exactly. And keep in mind that most people have a one primary, a predominant temperament, and maybe a secondary temperament. That's what we think. But anyway, so choleric or choleric, that's your kind of type A personality, the natural born leader. They love to take charge. They also don't have to know anything about what they're doing in order to take charge. They just dive right in, full of confidence, very driven to follow through, very goal-oriented, very, persevering and that sort of thing. And then the exact opposite of that temperament is the phlegmatic. So where the choleric is like hard driving and wants to take charge. The phlegmatic is like very easygoing, very peaceful, they're lovable. Like you just love to be around the phlegmatic because they're just so easygoing and so chill, and but they don't want to take charge. They can be excellent leaders. Like we say, they would be the best leaders. They could be servant leaders, but they have to be encouraged to take charge. So they're not, they're just not naturally inclined to take charge. They'd rather just fit in, and just have everybody going along very smoothly. The cholerics over here arguing and debating and, taking charge. And then the phlegmatic just wants to have a very easygoing, just very smooth flowing relationships with everybody. And then there's the sanguine. And the sanguine is your classic people person. So they're the most extroverted of all the temperaments. And they just love to be around people. They're very active, I said outgoing. They're very sociable. They just love to take on new ideas, new activities all the time. In fact, they're kind of like butterflies that flit from flower to flower, and then they have very quick, intense reactions, but they are not long-lived reactions. So they tend to be forgetful at the same time. And this is all part of their natural temperament. So they might, if you have a sanguine child, he's, running out the door and he forgot his books or he forgot his sports equipment, and he has come running back in to get the things he forgot and then gets distracted along the way and starts to play a game. So these are, kind of natural inclinations they have. And then the last type is the melancholic, and that is the most introverted of all the temperaments. So very introspective, very introverted, they tend to be very artistic. They have intense reactions, but they don't necessarily show other people their reactions. They're very inward. They are very detail oriented, a lot of attention to detail. They're very precise. They follow the rules. They have very high ideals. In fact, it's said about the melancholic that they so long for heaven that everything on earth falls short, meaning they can be easily disappointed with other people because they're, or activities or things or whatever, because it's not measuring up to their ideal. And they also can fall prey to worry because they can foresee all the future obstacles, that might be potentially happening with whatever, plan of action they're taking. So they are just, delightful, tend to be very artistic, musically inclined, thoughtful, sensitive, very sensitive people. So that's kind of the four in a nutshell.
Yes. Yes. So how in particular, understanding those temperaments, and then you had said you're going to have a dominant one, then and so is probably a secondary underlying one. I know you did mention introvert, extrovert. Just for our folks here, it's not always like that too clear cut. How would you define those, Laraine? Yeah,
that's a good question, because a lot of people will say, well, I love people. It's not like I don't like people. No, it's an introverted person means that they tend to get their energy from being not alone, but they need to have that time to recover. If they were, let's say, very sociable, they went to a party or whatever, then they need to recover. So like when if you have a melancholic child, you wouldn't like necessarily send them out to play with 10 new kids they've never met before and just say, okay, bye, have fun, drop them off there in the middle of a wild party. No, they would need a little time to adjust. They might be slow to warm up. And then afterwards, after they've played or whatever, then they might need to come back and, have some quiet time, read a book or something like that. Whereas the extrovert actually gains energy, like the more sociable activities they have, the more activities they have, the more they are energized, and they just keep on. They can just, they feel kind of like frustrated and something is amiss if they don't have enough activities going on.
Yeah. interesting. I had one of my son who would always wake up in the morning and just say, "So, where are we going today? What are we doing?"
Exactly.
And his feet hit the floor.
Oh yeah. And so you can see right now how when you're homeschooling, you can kind of see that one size fits all doesn't necessarily work if you have many kids, as most homeschoolers do. You're going to have to like kind of tailor the curriculum.
Yeah. So I know you said you homeschooled for some time with your children as well. And how many children do you have, Laraine?
So I 4 kids, and they're all grown up now. They're adults, and they all are married, and they all have kids.
So great. So you've seen it all played out. I know I have 7 and 4. 3 of mine are married, and I love seeing this next. The next playing out. Oh, yeah. And I think some of the things I've seen as the fruits of that is because we've homeschooled and we have the time to observe our children in their learning processes. Yes. I see it now playing out in their ability to observe their own children and define things.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. And it's so beautiful too, isn't it? To see your own children's children. It's amazing. It's actually mind-boggling that that's even possible, because I still remember them when they were kids.
Yes. So much of what you said also, plays into, for example, just one isn't just choosing curriculum, but also choosing the learning environment, would you say, as well as maybe just our expectations?
That's a really good point, because it's not like you have to have, a new curriculum for each child or something. That would be, not cost effective, but we would kind of tailor depending on the personality. So like you take your sanguine, they're going to need a lot of activities, and also just knowing what their temperament is. You'll also have a clue to what is going to be maybe a weakness in that, like what is a potential problem area. And then you can kind of foresee those obstacles and kind of prevent it. So ideally, anyway. So for example, let's take the sanguine.
Well, I like to say, what are self-knowledge is one of those beautiful benefits of homeschooling.
Yeah.
Giving our children the time for self-knowledge. So what are some ways we can help that with her?
Well, like, for example, I was going to take the sanguine as an example, because as I mentioned, they tend to be, very active, and it's one way you can engage them very easily, because they're people persons, so if you do something with them or you engage them in a fun activity, you can have the science projects going and all that kind of stuff. They're going to love that. But there may be something that is a weakness for them, is going to be perseverance. So they have trouble sticking with, or even sometimes breaking down. They have a project due in a month or something, or a big project. They might need help breaking it down into manageable chunks that they can conquer. So that would be an example. Once you know the temperament, you can actually foresee that obstacle for that one. And another one might be like the choleric. Let's see, they would be, they like to just knock things off, It's like, check this off my list, okay, write an essay, it's done, I've finished it. But they may not have ever checked you can't just turn in your rough draft. You know what I mean? It's like, they might need to take a little time to go over it and, let's do a second draft, and they don't like that. They wanted to knock it off, on to the next subject. I want to get all my work done in the shortest amount of time or whatever, but they need to also know how to, to do their work well, let's say, or these are all kind of useful little tips, that you can learn when you know their temperament. And also an interesting aspect of this is the parent's temperament. So the parent and the child mixing, because it's very useful to know what your own temperament is, because so for example, let's say you are a melancholic parent who's very detail oriented, very quiet, very thoughtful, very, attention to detail, and does all her work beautifully. And then let's say you had a sanguine child, and you might be thinking, as a parent, you might be thinking, what's wrong with that child? Or am I doing something wrong? But no, it may not be anything. There may not be anything wrong with your child, and you may not be doing anything wrong, but you just need to realize that this child is very different from you. And so they're not just the melancholic child, you could just, here's your task. I need you to do a research paper on such and such, and they're off and running, and they're working hard, and they're being very careful, and but the sanguine is distractible. So they might need help in that regard.
So there's this part I'm hearing you say that our own ability to recognize our own personalities has an effect in terms of what we expect from our children also. And as well as for our children to have the self-knowledge enough to say, even in just life skills and preparing them for when we launch them into the world, So around, is there, it seems to me in a home environment, it's very natural for us to do this. I'm sure even siblings, how do they get along with each other?
Oh, yeah.
When do we start talking about temperament? Is this something that we want to with our teenagers or younger? When do we start giving them that education as well?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, it's funny because we started talking about it, and our kids were probably too young, but I think they really start understanding maybe in middle school, I would say, is when they can understand. I used to do every once in a while do a little class at our kids. So we homeschooled for about 10 years, but then we sent our kids to a very small Catholic school that started with 7th grade. And they didn't all begin at 7th grade, but anyway, the 7th graders, I used to every once in a while stop in the classroom, and we would, I was like a guest speaker on temperament, and it was cute because they sometimes struggled to really see the difference between something that is kind of natural to you versus something that's in your environment. So that's something that takes a little while to figure out. But, it probably in our game, we have ages 12 and up, but we even played it with our 9-year-old grandson. So, you have a smart 9-year-old, you can play the game.
Right. But in terms of being able to, so it's also, I see it's in usage, and it's like anything else, building habits take time. So I'd like to talk about virtue. One of the things you mentioned were the saints, maybe some examples of some personalities, some saints, but how do we help our children grow in virtue?
Oh, yeah. Well, see, that's also where temperament does come in handy, because once you know what your child's temperament is, you kind of know already what their natural strengths are going to be, which could even be called natural virtues, and their natural weaknesses. And then the opposite virtue would be what you want to focus on, So, and there's ways to really encourage them to grow in these virtues. That's age appropriate too. So, for example, the choleric child has this tendency to argue and debate, and they're very stubborn, and they can be very strong-willed, so they can be kind of difficult at times, especially in their reactions. And so one of the things we would encourage them to grow in the virtue of humility or docility. Also, empathy is another virtue that they could use. Patience, and so there's little ways you could help them. You could teach them to not to respond so angrily, for example, when their sibling, is frustrating them, or not to say, I already did that work when you've asked them to do something. I already did it. You can ask them to respond in a more respectful tone. You can work on that. You can ask them, if they're older, if they have younger siblings, you can ask them to help their younger siblings. And that way they will grow in patience, and they will also become more empathic. And then, so for the phlegmatic, we didn't talk enough about the phlegmatic. Phlegmatic seems like, oh, this is your wonder child, right? They're so peaceful and easygoing, and you ask them to do, they do their work. They're just like, they're kind of like, you just get them started and here's your worksheets and they fill them all out dutifully. But they can also be so easygoing that they don't really think about what their own goals are in life, their own, what things really matter to them. They might be just so getting along, just willing to fit in, that they're not really pondering some of the more difficult questions, about life.
And so, psychology wise too, you become more of like a codependent in a way.
Right.
Some of these things you can see. I was like how there's this another Sophia Press book, Victory Over Vice, that Fulton Sheen does. And it's like our virtues, are born. They can also be our vices, this kind of like double-edged sword.
No, that's really true. So true. Yeah.
Yes, our ability to help them, as they say, launch them into the world with this tool. I think you're bringing in the fact that, our children can start to see it and play naturally, even at a young age. But I don't think we give our teenagers enough credit to say they really do want to do noble things.
Oh, yes.
Virtuous.
Yes, exactly. Oh, yeah. And there's just so many ways we can encourage the growth in virtue, just starting when don't wait until they're teenagers, start when they're really young, with the small tasks that they can do, and then connect it to the virtue that you're trying to help them work on.
Well, I know I had listened to a talk that you and Art gave some time ago, a couple of years ago. And I think it was at the end, he mentioned that one of the saints had talked about, well, God, why didn't you give us all the temperaments,
Yeah.
What is it?
All the natural virtues. That's right.
Yes,
St. Catherine. Yeah. Right. And he told her, he replied, he said, because then you would not be charitable. Like you would not grow in charity. We have to know that we need other people. And by recognizing that we all have strengths and weaknesses, we're kind of like more team players then, we realize that I can depend on, this other member of my family to help me out in different situations or whatever.
Yeah.
But
and like all the beautiful flowers in God's garden, but it's also that dependence on God.
Mm-hmm.
I know, there's things I for a long time, I wished away my worrying.
Oh yeah.
And at some point, a spiritual director says to me, he's like, Paola, it's in your genes.
Yeah.
You can't get rid of it.
Yeah.
Look at it as a blessing. And it's like, of course, it's one of my go-to with God is my word.
Exactly. And like St. Jerome, for example, he was notorious for having a very difficult temperament. He was very critical and argumentative and all this kind of stuff. And I think he sent himself away to be a hermit, but because so many clashes with so many people, but he ended up doing his greatest work, translating the Bible. So,
right.
Yeah. So out of our temperament, God wants us to do something beautiful for him, and for the world, I guess, other people and for God. Yeah.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you.
Yeah.
So great. Well, I know, again, one of the tendencies is for us to label things. I just want you to speak a little bit about that, again, the temperaments, how's the best way to use them, and then tell us where we can learn more deeply about that, and get more information, because this is just really kind of scratching the surface, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Again, I can't emphasize enough. We're not trying to put people in boxes or label people. And the goal really is to kind of be understanding and accepting of our own temperament, and also understanding and accepting and forgiving of other people. And once you realize that something is a temperament issue, that it's God's gift to them, you automatically are already more understanding and forgiving of them. You're not harshly criticizing them for something they can't really help but respond in that way, And yet we never stay stuck in there, because the whole goal is to become more Christ-like, to follow Christ, to grow in virtue, to hopefully grow in holiness. And to do that, we need to learn how to respond in the most appropriate way, in the most prudent way. And we need to teach our kids that as well. So you don't just always react in the way that your temperament might dictate, because the reaction is just kind of hardwired into us, but it's not always the correct, the most prudent, the most virtuous choice. Like I struggle. Yeah.
Not necessarily in the sense that, so like, can we change some of that? Or is it more that we can just understand ourselves better?
I think it's that we really try to grow in virtue. And we take on that. We know that we have this tendency, but we don't just sit there. So like I've always been like, I'm also a choleric. So I've struggled with being very impulsively responding to something out of anger, and many times I very inappropriately responded in a work situation, like arguing with my boss. What, what a knucklehead, really, why would I do that? So I had to like call myself to task. Like, you need to learn how to respond. Don't just knee-jerk reaction, which is what I was doing, like, why would I do that? I do need to keep my job. So I had to like really learn some skills of like count to 10 or just whatever it is, take a deep breath, and think kind thoughts about my boss, pray for my boss. Like there were so many things that I could do, but so there's so many things you could do to try to grow in virtue. And it's never really like my temperament has not changed. I still have that tendency, but I am slowly getting a little bit better at my reaction.
No, I love how you say that, Laraine, because we are pilgrims on this journey and our call to holiness. And so we're not like, this isn't perfect. We're not going to answer all our kids' needs perfectly. But like you said, asking God, infusing God's grace into this whole equation.
Yes.
They'll just...
Right. Exactly. Going to confession frequently, whatever you can do. Yeah. Mass every day if you can.
So Laraine, before we start with wrapping this up, show us some of the books again. I know I asked you if you have a few handy there.
I have a few here,
so I have the benefits of each one. So that one's more like the general book.
Can you see that? That's the first book. The Temperament God Gave You. You can find it at Sophia Institute. And then there's the Temperament God Gave Your Spouse, also at Sophia. And then this one you could get on Amazon, the Temperament God Gave Your Kids, because different publisher, how to motivate, discipline, and love your children. And it's actually a really quick read. So this one is like very useful for homeschooling parents, I would say.
And would you have to read the first one to get?
No. I think you could just read this one all by itself. Or, I mean, if you wanted to read, this one's a big one. I don't know if you could see, it's kind of fat.
But it's good. And like you said, there's this journey ourselves. We're pilgrims, so we need to get ourselves together.
And then there's the game too.
Yes, I was going to say.
To show it? Oh, you have it. There you go.
Yep. And so the game, Know Thyself, which is awesome. It's, I love it because there's nothing like learning in fun. Come on, really. So it does come with these cards, which give you the little cheat sheets in there. I kind of like to think it's kind of like a apples to apples kind of game almost.
Exactly.
How you play it.
That's exactly it.
Cards.
Yeah, you got to shuffle
around the table.
Yep. So here's some cards.
Yeah. Exactly. So then you're going around the table and just everybody has to put what they think one word. So some of them have different words like, slothful. You can make for some funny situations.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You have to pick, you're describing one person and it rotates around the circle and who is so-and-so. And then everybody else chooses from their hand, team player or take charge or party animal or princess and the pea. Some of them are a little tricky. You have to, kind of use your imagination.
Right.
And, but that makes it fun.
Right.
And
and so then at the end, the way you win that round is by.
Yeah. Well, the judge picks there's a judge that rotates again, and the judge will pick the card they like the best. And then, so whoever's card was chosen wins that round. They get the round winner card. So it is just like apples to apples. And it is really fun. And as I mentioned, it says ages 12 and up, but actually we played it with our 9-year-old grandson, and he had a good time. He just had some of the words, like he maybe had to ask, what does this mean? If it was
right. But
yeah.
What a great way.
Yeah.
Because those key words are some of the words we use to describe the different personalities. So like in a fun way, they're learning themselves as well as, and also when you see, it's kind of eye-opening that we have an idea of what we're like versus what other people think we're like.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
We might be surprised.
That makes for the fun part of this game. Yeah.
Well, you have been such a delight. As I said, I see so much of this, and we've had talks before about learning styles. This fits so beautifully into the idea that your child is not a blank slate. They have inherent dignity because they're a child of God right from the beginning. And, the temperament just shows us one of those other beautiful qualities. So any parting words for us, Laraine? Anything you'd like to leave these beautiful homeschool families here?
Oh gosh, well, just keep on homeschooling. I think the world is getting crazier, and it's getting harder and harder, to probably. So it's like it's a wonderful thing that all the homeschoolers are doing. Just however much you can make that individual kind of tailoring your learning experience to the child, I think is a wonderful thing. The melancholic can use that quiet time. They probably won't like their a sanguine sibling making all kinds of noise in the same room. So, you could send them, like, maybe the melancholic needs a room to work on in quiet, whereas the sanguine can be right in the middle of things, and things like that. There's all kinds of ideas that you can use to help tailor the learning experience to your different children. Yeah.
And that's how we bring the joy into it. I know everybody feels this, they're called to holiness, just like we're, called to homeschool. It may be that path for ourselves, giving up our own, ideas of what it should be by bringing us all these different personalities of kids. So great.
Right.
Well, I want to thank you again, Laraine. You did mention to me that you have a new book coming out. So before we leave, tell me about the new book and again, where we can get it.
Okay, that's also sophiainstitute.com, where you can get the game and the other books. But it's called A Little Way of Living with Less. It's a reflections based on Saint Therese, the Little Flower. And it's about how can we declutter our lives and our souls to kind of focus on what matters, kind of get rid of some of the clutter that's in our lives. Yeah.
Oh, that sounds beautiful. There is a lot of clutter with homeschooling as well, but never with books, because you can never have enough books, right?
Right. That's right. Oh, and my homes, here I am, my kids are all grown up, and some of the homeschooling things I've saved because I love them so much.
Exactly. But you're right. That's simply, we want a simple life. I think God's ways are simple. Yeah. We tend to complicate it. So I'm looking forward to that book. Again, to our audience, all the links will be below this video. You can reach, we didn't mention, but you do have an online temperamentquiz.com.
Yes.
It's a great fun thing to do with your family. Get in there, see what you come up with. It's kind of eye-opening as well, but gives you those tools to help you to all get along and be able to launch your children into the world. Well, I want to thank you all. Please join us in the Catholic Homeschool community. That is our free off Facebook place where we gather together, we share these ideas. You can also reach us at the Catholic Homeschool podcast on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe. Please invite all your friends, invite people that are not even homeschooling, because this is such like this beautiful temperament talk is something that we all can learn from and share. May God bless you abundantly. Thanks again, Laraine. God bless.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. God bless.
God bless. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking it and subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can find us on all your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and SoundCloud. Thank you, and have a blessed day.